Hello, I'm here today with Trevor, Chief Constable of Bed's Police, and I've had a fair bit to do with the police over the years. I'm a volunteer for the IAG, which is the Independent Advisory Group to the police, and we're kind of like a critical friend to the police. We kind of point out things to help their community relations, and so I've asked Trevor whether we could meet up and discuss the Casey report and Bed's Police part of that. And so before we go any further, I think humanity is a really important thing that gets lost in a lot of these, and so I think it's important to meet Trevor a little bit as who he is as a person, and then go on from there. So Trevor, what is it like being Chief Constable? Is it like the best thing in the world? You've got your feet up, relaxed. Is that the kind of thing it is, or how would you describe it?
Well, it's a bit of both of those things. So it isn't the feet up and relaxed, which I know you know that, Nigel. But it's a real privilege to do this job. Bedfordshire Police are a great organisation. There's men and women who work for us, who volunteer and work alongside us, who do amazing things and who change people's lives, and in some instances save people's lives on a daily basis. So be the person that is, ensuring that they've got the tools, guidance, direction, resources that they need to be able to deliver that service to the public of Bedfordshire, and to keep that service improving is a real privilege, actually.
Yeah.
As you know, I live in Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
I've got 2 kids. They go to school in Bedfordshire, so I'm invested in the county as I'm invested in the service that we provide. And I want, when I'm in the playground or I go down my local pub or whoever I'm talking to, people mention policing and want it to be heard in a positive way. Yeah. What we do is challenging. So it's certainly not boring. But it is a great privilege, and this is a really good force, and it's a great county.
Yeah. And so did you leave school just with the idea of, yay, I'll be a police officer, or was that a goal? Was that something you felt then, or how did you end up here?
I guess I had an interest in it as a sort of teenager, but I left university when a lot of my friends were going into, to work in London for different companies and things like that, and that at that point didn't appeal to me, and I thought I'd really need to scratch this itch and go into policing. And at that point, that might not have been forever, but it's turned out for me it's a lifelong vocation. I've entered my 29th year of service as we sit here, and that has been, it was never a plan to be a Chief Constable. I can assure you of that. I've spent most of my career investigating things. I've worked in some really specialised environments and dealt with some really tricky crime, but I've very much been at that end of things for the majority of my service. In the latter years, I've had the privilege and to have moved into what is a very senior position in policing. But actually, I think that journey, that experience has served me well. Yeah. And this is a special force. I've been here since 2019. It's big enough here that there is everything that happens in policing happens in Bedfordshire. Whilst the force itself is of a size where it is possible to know everyone, and that's really valuable, I think, as a leader of policing. And
I totally agree about Bedfordshire. I think there's a lot of solutions in this area that would work for the whole country, and there's a lot of those dynamics. So it's really a smaller setting, but I think there's national things that can come from it. Just 29 years of policing. You must have seen a lot of joys and a lot of sorrows. What pops in your head when it comes to joys and sorrows in that time?
Well, I think, in terms of joys, you work hard on cases. You work hard on cases because bad things have happened to people and you want justice for them. And, there have been some really fantastic operations I've been in. There's, people involved in really serious and organised crime that I've worked on, and knowing that actually you've overcome their level of sophistication. They've sought to evade law enforcement and have got what is a really good result. Those are rewarding times if you have had a journey like mine, and equally if you know that you're getting justice for a victim that really needs that. And in terms of lows, I've lost a colleague of mine in a policing operation, which is really difficult, and that just highlights that actually it's a risky business. And when we're at sleep tonight, there'll be police officers going into difficult, challenging situations, and sadly, all too often, I see my officers get assaulted, and that's something I want the courts to take really seriously, because it seems to be an increasing issue for society. But also, as you mentioned at the start, there's been challenging issues for policing, and now is the moment where we really need to be on the front foot in terms of building confidence with communities, and particularly those communities that historically have had the least confidence in policing.
Yeah.
And in Bedfordshire, we don't do policing to the community, we do it with the community.
And so 29 years of experience, lots of highs and lows. The Casey report, which you're it almost brought us into.
Yeah.
That report, when I read it, seemed very stark, very blunt, seemed to hit like a piece of 2x4 between the eyes, boom. I know folks in their 20s, I've got daughters in their 20s, the confidence in the Met policing and so on is fairly low, and as females as well. And so the Casey report came out. I'm just sort of looking at it. I can look at it with my eyes. I can see things there that I think, wow, okay, that doesn't surprise me at all. What would you say the biggest surprise looking at the Casey report was for you? Or was there one? Was it just you knew that anyway?
I guess as a chief, we were made aware by Sir Mark in terms of what was coming, and I think that's important that was the case, so that we could, because this reports into the Metropolitan Police, into policing of London, but obviously there are things in that report. These things spill over, and the public don't always see forces by geographic area; they see the police. And what I'm also, culture has been a priority. It's my number one priority, and it was a priority of the former chief here. So we are on a journey, and I've been really focused on this for a few years. So I might be a fairly new chief, but I am kicking on where good work was done before here in Bedfordshire, directly focusing on some of these issues. So whilst that report is, I totally understand the concern of the public, and I'm rightly concerned at reading the 350-odd pages of that report, of the content. What I'm not doing is sitting here saying there's nothing to see here, because we have had some of the problems in Bedfordshire that were seen in that report. But we've also been doing a lot of things to address the cultural issues that are highlighted in that report in policing. So, it's really nice to have the opportunity actually to kind of discuss it through that lens, because I want the public of Bedfordshire to have a better visibility of what we're doing.
Yeah. And so I mean, let me ask a difficult question, something that was in the press. Does it feel a little bit, looking at the Casey report, I'm assuming you've looked at that in detail because it's your kind of thing, and especially looking into culture, but is it the kind of thing where the public are viewing it and saying, insert police force here instead of the Met Police? And are there areas you feel Beds Police are doing better than the Met on? I'm not wanting to land you in it with Met commissioners and all the rest of it, but in some ways, are there some elements you feel don't apply? And what are those? I'm guessing scale is a big one. I'm guessing some of those things play into it. But are there any things in the Casey report you feel don't apply to beds?
The Casey report highlights real problems in culture, and I can only speak for Bedfordshire. So, have we seen issues of misogyny? Yes. Have we seen issues of racism? Yes. But there's a position on that. There is no room in this organisation, and this force has taken a really robust position on those things. And in fact, it was only maybe 3 years ago where we sacked a senior officer for abusing his position. And so there is no room in this organisation for anyone who holds any ism. And I'm committed to rooting that out of the organisation. But do I think we've made big progress and I can draw comparisons? Yes, because if I look at the experience of people in our organisation, I can see a very different one to what I read there. I'll quote, I think the report talks about the likelihood of black or Asian colleagues being referred to professional standards, for instance. A disparity there, and it's a significant number. I don't quite remember what it was. We looked for that here. I looked for it personally and found that a few years ago. And as a result of processes we put on and investing in leadership at every level and talking about how this plays out in the workplace, sharing lived life experience of some colleagues, at a time where I think you were twice as likely to be referred to professional standards. Now you are no more likely. So we've identified a disparity internally in our organisation, and we've looked at it, we've focused on it, we've spoken it, we've brought it to the surface of conversation. And one of the beauties about the size of this force is I have been able to speak to pretty much every member of staff. I've certainly spoken to all the leaders about this, and then we've noticed change, a positive change for the experience. So if you identify a disparity and you're able to remove it, that's a positive one. And not just disparity now, but when we have people from underrepresented groups joining Bedfordshire Police, we really focus on their experience because it needs to be a good one. We want people of difference to join this organisation, and we don't expect them to leave it at the door.
Yeah. And so, you as the exec invited me to one of your training sessions on that, Be You, which is be yourself.
Yeah.
Bring who you are as a person to the force, rather than the force trying to mould you into a shape that just one size fits all.
Yeah.
And so it was encouraging to hear, because I've sat in on a lot of things over the years which needed that. And my group that I've worked with, the IAG, is a very diverse group. We've been called into a lot of settings to comment on things, very often confidentially, to help bring a community perspective into things, which is part of you guys being open. You can't be open about everything, but you're open about a fair bit of things that we've been in over the years. We can comment on what we're invited into, really. But with that, that conference of BU, and it was caring for officers. You had, I'm just trying to think of the guy's name who wrote Blue, the book on policing and some of the emotional aspects of that. And you also had this sense of trying to bring yourself to policing, which helps create a diverse police force. I don't know, is there anything you want to say on that from your perspective?
No, you came to those events, Nigel, and they spoke over 12 sessions to pretty much the whole workforce. Since then, that's not. We've done that. We've said that, so that box is ticked. This is a constant message, and as I said at the start, investing in leadership at all levels of your organisation. Right now, we've got quite a young organisation in terms of service and age profile, because we've grown quickly over the last few years. That needs good leadership when you've got a large part of your workforce that's looking for role models. So right now we are focused on the first line leaders in our organisation, because your immediate boss when you join an organisation of this nature is an important person in your career. So therefore, rightly, we're investing in those individuals. So everyone is going through a continuous professional development program that starts with a week's input. That first day of that input is the first half day is delivered by me and my team, where I set out my expectations of them as a leader. And again, it's closed with questions and answers. And whilst there's some elements of that enable them to be an effective sergeant or staff equivalent, the majority of it focuses on culture and looking after our people so that they can look after the public, and knowing your people, valuing difference, and making them, helping them to be really effective, inclusive leaders. So it's that, so that builds on. We did a session with chief inspectors who were the middle managers. Because you could have that scenario where I talk a really good game, and the officers the sergeants are hearing this, and then there's a kind of bit in the middle where it doesn't go up and beyond if you're not careful. So you've got to focus at every level of the organisation on culture, and if you get that right, your standards, your service to the public, and your crime fighting is going to be.
Yeah, so I've heard people on culture change in the NHS and things like that. And one of the things that they say is very often if the people at the top get it, that's really helpful. New recruits are easy to train and bring in. But it's that middle group in the middle that are really difficult to get culture change into. And has that been an experience of Beds Police, or has your method of going through chief inspectors and others, do you feel that's broken it down? Do you feel you're getting results?
We're definitely getting results. I went and sat on a team briefing last night in Luton, a room with an inspector, sergeants, and full of young officers, really motivated, really engaged, really talking about the service they're providing to the public. And I actually thought this is some of the finest policing I've seen. I was really proud of those individuals, and I had every confidence that they were going to go out there and engage with our public. Sometimes you're meeting people at the worst day of their life in crisis, but they do that with compassion and professionalism, because and they know, part of our commitment in lines with, the plan of action on race is really effective involvement of the community, of scrutiny. Everything they do is recorded on body-worn video, rightly so, because it provides evidence, but it also enables really effective scrutiny. And if you know who's using their powers and who they're using it on, and then you're able to watch the execution of that, and you're unable to have the public watch that, and the public from good representation from groups who perhaps need to have more visibility of what the police are doing, then that helps build confidence and trust, and it's a really good feedback mechanism to the officers. We don't just find someone who hasn't used their powers right, we find the ones that do it brilliantly as well and tell them.
Yeah. So I've got loads of questions for you, but I'm going to try and streamline a little bit. I've been invited into some groups that have dealt with your internal discipline of officers. I just wonder if you could tell us, what's the process? How do you find the Met? Obviously, their discipline methods they said were not effective, and they need to be looked at again. But in policing, when you discover something goes wrong, and this happens in all societies, all cultures, all different officers, all different settings. What's the process that happens? And maybe you can also feed into that a little bit about Bluebell as well, and some of those things. So,
obviously, there's a number of ways So I'll give you a kind of overview, and I'll try not to go on too long. But if a member of the public's telling us something's not right, then we will treat that as a complaint and we will look into it. And depending on what the nature of that is will be depending on whether it's looked in by a supervisor on the front line or whether it goes to a professional standards department. Clearly, if it was a criminal in nature, then that would be, treated really seriously. But any complaint from the public is looked at first and then an appropriate response put in place. But one of the things, in an organisation like this is you're often with another person. You're often being, working as part of a team. And that's why you need a culture of upstanders, not bystanders. Our policies is ones of proactivity, not being bystanders. Therefore, but you also need to have ways of people to be upstanders where they can do that with confidence. So you mentioned Bluebell. So that looks at people who may have been a victim of an inappropriate sexual advance or misogynistic behaviour, and that allows people to come forward and say, this is not right, and help me to address it. So we shouldn't need to have those things, but we must have them to make sure that we create the environment for people to step forward. And in Bedfordshire, that's an initiative that we've done. We have champions across the force and allies, and we've had a good number of people come forward and use that to really good effect. And the feedback from those people is, I was listened to, I was believed, I was supported, and the force did something about it. We've got a number of ways, I'd like people to just come forward. But if they want to come forward in a way that they feel they can have a degree of anonymity and support, those things are in place, and it's really well signposted.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things with how culture change happens. It takes a long time, and it's very hard to measure. It's very hard to know the culture has changed. And I think one of the things I found travelling around the world, I become more aware of my own culture when I meet other cultures. And then I find out things about my culture because I'm blind to it a little bit. And I just wonder, new people coming in, do you use those people to assess your culture, or how do you assess the change in culture and that things are moving forward in racism, or not being racist, in not being misogynistic, not being homophobic, all those things? How do you measure that?
Yeah, so one thing that the policing is able to do is collect lots of information. You need to make sure you're collecting the right information and you look at it the right way and you ask the right questions of it. But, in terms of new people coming in, certainly the message to them is we spend a lot of time talking about values and the values of the organisation. And from day one, we make it really clear that if you've seen, it doesn't matter how experienced someone may be in comparison, if you find anyone not acting in line with the values of this organisation, that you call it out and you will be supported. So certainly that is the culture that we promote, and what I can see is that happening. Yes, we will bring the conduct machine into action, have done. Since 2020, I think we've either dismissed or would have dismissed, had they not resigned, 10 people from this organisation. But nevertheless, if you can address things early, you can set a tone where behaviour that's, they say that culture is the worst behaviour a leader's willing to walk past. Well, if no leader's walking past that kind of behaviour, then you tend to avoid things developing into, getting away with it, and therefore it's okay, and that kind of culture. So that's one of the things where, as I said to you at the start, I'm not saying there's nothing to see here. We've got Bluebell, we've got it for a reason. We've got other support groups. We want to see any lived life experience. But what I get is when I talk to our staff, and you need to create as many safe forums to do that, which we do, and then the overall experience here is a positive one. And it's certainly the case for many of our individuals from black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds and other individuals of any other difference, visible or non-visible. That is the tone here, and very much, it's a fact. And this is the conversation we have with the workforce. Organisations that are inclusive and are diverse and inclusive, they outperform ones that aren't, because you use those differences to your best skills. One of the big advantage we've got in Bedfordshire is the diversity, the knowledge and the support of the community, who are, many people like yourself, Nigel, willing to give up time, willing to give advice, knowing that we won't always follow it, but also who deserve an explanation as to what we've done, why we've done it. And we get great support from our communities. We get invited to pretty much everything, which I seek for us to accept in every way we can. And spent last night at Iftar at Bury Park Mosque, which is really important. That's a necessary thing to do, because you need to be spending time with communities and building trust when there isn't a challenging issue, so that when there is, you already have that trust and that conversation is effective.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about communities that have seen police as harmful in the past, and there's a long history of that going back to the 60s and so on. What are in terms of restorative justice in situations? Restorative justice is a process that you guys began, I think, some time ago as a police, and it's now been passed on to the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. But in restorative justice, the power imbalance has to go, and it has to be victim-led. But policing has to stay in the position it's in. So in restoring community trust, you can attend events and so on, but in really getting communities in, how does the pain and the discomfort that's in communities get addressed, do you think? It's a tough question.
No, it's a good question, Nigel, and I think let's talk about the black community, and I'll single the black community out because the fact is our black communities across the UK, but and here in Bedfordshire, are the communities who have had the lowest confidence in policing, and for good reasons. If you bundle every community up together, then you're not necessarily understanding the different issues of different communities. The black community right now is the community that deserve extra effort and engagement to build that trust. And there's reasons for that, because if we look at, issues such as stop and search, a very emotive issue for our black community. And that's why it's important that we are in the room with different members of the community as many times as possible, listening and genuinely listening to their experiences, but also sharing with them what we're doing. So that if we go on to stop and search, that has a history with the community, or certain communities, of feeling over-policed and under-protected. What we're able to do here is involve the community in the scrutiny and the use of that power, as I've already said, and they can watch footage of it being used, they can look at the data. And I can tell you now, here and now, the data is you are more likely to be stopped and searched in Bedfordshire if you're black than if you're white. In fact, in Luton, you are twice as likely, 2 times is the ratio. That's the lowest level of disparity across policing that I am aware of, and it's the lowest I've seen it here. It's continued to go down. I want it to be no more likely.
Yeah.
But it's important to be honest and upfront about the conversation and the circumstances and actually the nuance of the numbers. Because, but we are using that tactic more, and the disparity is going down.
Yeah.
And we're using it appropriately, and where we're not, we identify that and we look at it. But you need to have those conversations before we can then move on. Because if you don't going to have that conversation, it's difficult to then move on and say, why are you not encouraging your son or daughter to join the police? You need to address those things first. So, and interestingly, I looked at the same figures, and in Luton, if you're Asian, you're no more likely. Now, that's the first time we've got to that point. So this disparity, and I've only picked out one issue, but it is an important one for the community.
So just on that issue, I think what I have heard in communities is the car stoppages of certain communities.
Yeah.
Now, that's not something measured in the same way as stop and search. But in terms of that, so, I mean, I just imagine your job's quite huge in trying to get all these things working. It's a very difficult task.
And that's why you have to look at, it's what next. So we've done that with stop and search. We're doing it with use of force. The use of force has to be broken down. We don't just need to look at who used a taser. We need to look at who drew the taser and who do they point it at and what circumstances. And if it wasn't used... but continues to be drawn and not used. What does that tell us? The road traffic stops we are looking at now in the same way. And the next place I want to look is when we use our powers under the Mental Health Act, which sadly we are using more and more and more. Because if you need to understand what your data says so you know where to look. So that's something we're actually committed to doing here and doing it with the public. And I want people from communities who are affected to be involved in the scrutiny of that. And our officers and staff know that we're doing this, and it's important they know it. But it's not meaning they're not using it. We're just making sure it's being used to prevent and detect crime.
Yeah.
And that, I'm pleased to say, is going really in the right direction.
But I think it's also when you get communities on board, you find out more information, you can detect crime, you can do things more. And I think looking at the Casey report, looking at what you're doing in Beds Police and being part of the journey, critiquing that along the way, in that, I think the future of policing is far more with community. And that dovetailing together on issues actually brings a much more powerful response rather than this removed from society almost. You got this kind of view that a young guy would become a policeman, get a bicycle and get stuck in some house way out in the middle of nowhere kind of view of policing removed from the community. But that integration with community, that working with different, getting feedback and things, do you see that as the future going forward? What do you see ahead?
So we need lots of specialist capabilities, We need to keep people safe from threats online. Fraud is very much enabled by the cyber and the internet. But nevertheless, community policing is a really, is an integral part of, or a hallmark of a high-performing force. And we're committed to maintaining and increasing actually our community policing effort, but it's also the way you do that. So right now in Dallow, there's been a really successful Dallow Cares piece of work, which you may have heard of, where instead of dealing with policing challenges, we've sat down with a geographic area of the community. We have done some hard-edge community policing, and in fact we've tackled serious and organised crime and lots of things that problems that happened in that area. But at the same time, we've understood what the problems of the community are from their perspective. We've understand what the demand on services of other sectors, such as the local authority and health, and therefore have worked in a much more preventative way as well, so that we can to provide support to individuals to stop them going down a pathway that then means they end up encountering committing offences and getting a policing response. So it's and in Bedfordshire, to work as a system should be possible. We've only got 3 local authorities, a health trust, a mental health trust. We should be able to pull together as a system, and we are, for the good of the community. But community policing is the policing's frontline visible method of doing that. And we are certainly going to continue to support that. But it's, I want people to be safe in the street, but safe in their home as well. Particularly if you're from a section of the community who's in the past been less likely to reach out and ask for help if you needed it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Trevor. Thanks for your time. I won't ask the other questions that buzz around my head. I don't want to be accused of wasting police time or anything like that. But thank you very much for your time today and giving us who you are and a lot of your thinking behind things.
Well, thank you for the interview, but thanks for the help and support and advice you give to the police. You don't always, as you said, the critical friend. Therefore, you are often pointing out things that need addressing. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor.